Maria and Javi, unfortunately, are not here today, but for me, that's a great opportunity to introduce our speaker, Elena Velado-Alonso, who most of you know already for time that she spent with us at EBD. She left last year for the University of Göttingen in Germany, but what she's going to talk about today is actually related to the work she did here. So I'm looking forward to it, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Leticia, and thank you for the organization for hosting me here today. So, I don't know why it's not working. Okay, just as a brief introduction of my profile, just saying that I have studies in veterinary, agroecology, and ecology. I am currently a postdoctoral researcher in the InterRes project in Göttingen University, but what I am going to introduce, as Leticia said, is the Showcase project that I developed here for 2.5 years, more or less. Yes. So, what is Showcase? Showcase is a European project with a quite ambitious objective. The idea is to make biodiversity an integral part of European farming, thanks to the provision of evidence about synergies between agriculture and biodiversity, also identifying incentives of key stakeholders, and communicating principles and best practice to a broad community, thanks to the creation of a European network of experimental biodiversity areas. And because this is quite broad and big, I have divided this presentation in 3 parts. The first one is going to be about effective scientific communication through narratives. The second part, I will summarily explain our experience in a social process with farmers. And finally, I will introduce some results also in a summary. So let's go for the narratives. As many of you may know, we need to change how we produce foods. We need food systems that are more fair and sustainable. And despite all the scientific debate, it's more or less clear what we have to do. For example, we have to reduce the footprint of agriculture in biodiversity. What is less clear is how to do that. Because of that, in recent years, there is a new agenda for mainstreaming biodiversity across sectors, especially in agriculture. The thing is that integrating biodiversity and farming has not only conservation benefits, but also it will enhance nature contributions to people. And during the last years, an increasing body of scientific literature is showcasing the benefits that biodiversity can have for crop production. And also, we can say that there is a quite political effort to better integrate biodiversity in agriculture. However, the results, we can say that are still limited, and the uptake of biodiversity-friendly farming practices by practitioners is slow at best. So what can we do as ecologists, as scientists? The first step, I will say, is to spread our word. So it's really important that we show our results and help others to implement them. But for doing that, we require to join forces with others. We alone, as ecologists, cannot change the things. We have to convince those ones that actually implement the practices. And for that, in recent years, participatory and translational research has been gaining momentum, and more is something requested in research projects and so on. And we can say that communication is probably now more frequent than ever. However, more frequent doesn't necessarily mean more successful or more effective. And that is what I am going to introduce today. Effective communication is a way of communicating that connects with the audience by understanding its context and considering its needs. The problem is that the communication environment of agriculture is quite complex. There is a huge variety of stakeholders, from farmers to consumers, that bring different viewpoints. They have contrasted interests and perceptions, and spread discourses and counter-discourses all the time. So that, for us as scientists, is quite difficult, quite complex, because in general terms we lack of a good training in communication, and in general terms we can say that we communicate with goodwill, but not with a clear agenda or thinking a lot about how to do it. And today I'm going to introduce you to narratives. Narratives are a subjective communication tool used to influence audience. A narrative is a way of presenting events in a logical way. For that, narratives define and position actors, set the context, delineate objectives, and prescribe action. And it has been proved that narratives help to improve understanding and to improve memory retention. So there are successful communicative tools. And that's why many stakeholders have developed their own narratives. And here I want to make an emphasis saying that the same piece of evidence can be framed in many different ways and be integrated in different narratives to support different interests. That's why questions such as who is advocating for what and with what aims are important questions to think about when you want to develop your own narrative. So in Showcase project, thinking on all that, we perform a literature review to try to identify which are the dominant narratives used nowadays in the conservation agriculture bundle. And probably most of you know, and because I will say that that is one of the most dominant, the anthropocentric one, that says that nature underpins human society and use terms such as ecosystem or nature contribution to peoples. Another example is tech solutions that considers that technology will solve environmental problems. Another one that is becoming more important and has been developed mostly by indigenous communities and local communities is the spiritual one that considers that nature is included in moral and ritual beliefs, such as, for example, in the Pachamama point of view. Another example is the ecocentric that focuses in nature and gives to nature the right to exist and often use topics such as pristiness and wilderness. Another example that I think in recent years is gaining more and more attention and support is the ecological crisis that says that humans are ruining the earth and farmers are responsible also to this. And another one is the economic one that is quite often used by companies that considers that economy and conservation can be complementary and uses concepts such as natural capital. In the agricultural side, discourses have developed across years, including more and more dimensions in the goals that agriculture have. At the very beginning, the objective was just producing food, but now aspects such as not only the quantity, but the quality of the food, the social aspects such as being equal shared, or the environmental aspects such as protecting biodiversity are being integrated. And from those discourses, new narratives have arisen, such as, for example, ecological intensification or regenerative farming or agroecology. So, knowing all this, that probably you have percentage that this exists, we wanted to know how this is in reality. So we choose a European context as an example where biodiversity and conservation debates has been quite big for the last decades, and we download almost 6,000 texts consisting in press releases and news from 40 different farming-related organizations. We also classified those by their purposes, so advocacy groups, farmer organizations, agro-industry sector, intergovernmental agencies, and NGOs for the period to 2015-2020 to see how these narratives are used, are implemented in real communication environments. And the first result we found is that biodiversity concept is quite often used by all these organizations. So around 35% of all texts included the term biodiversity, and we consider that a really high number because there are many other synonyms that can be used. And because of that, we believe that biodiversity could be a good boundary concept that bring to the same table different parts with different point of views and focus on that, to maintain the debate. Also, we wanted to know how these stakeholders are positioned through the narratives they use. So we performed this multivariant analysis based on the frequency of keywords. And what we found is that, for example, NGOs and intergovernmental agencies have a more conservationist discourses, whereas industry sector use more agronomic and economic speeches, and farmers' organizations partly overlap with the industry sector. And maybe you are wondering what is this red point. These red points are scientists, but we should be cautious. So the result is that we are quite far away from farmers in how we communicate, but we only integrated one scientific organization. This is SAPEA, who is the responsible for the advisory of the policy making process at the European level. So seeing all this, we wanted to know better when all these stakeholders talk about biodiversity, what they were talking about. And as a result, we found that, for example, farmers, the green line, have used or talk about different topics as NGOs that you can see in yellow, or intergovernmental agencies that you can see in blue. And they refer to aspects such as quality, soil, or safeguarding, while the NGOs talk about protection, development, and society. So when these stakeholders talk about biodiversity, they talk from different perspectives and using different narratives. And we also wanted to know, okay, but what happens when they talk about not only biodiversity, but also agriculture? And what we found is that NGOs, intergovernmental agencies, and advocacy groups mostly talk about the science-policy interface. And this is not happening in farmers' organization and industry sector. But both do talk about farm-to-fork strategy. And farmers' organization talk about agriculture and biodiversity more about specific aspects, such as, for example, the implementation of flower strips and lines or landscape measures, whereas industry focus more in mention things like pressure or challenge in relation to agriculture and biodiversity. So, seeing all this, we believe that at least we all should think about how we communicate and develop strategies depending on our audience. So why should ecologists reflect on their own narrative? First of all, because as we have shown, stakeholders are positioned, but also we have to think that conservation biology is positioned. We have a desirable outcome that is enhancing and protecting biodiversity and not other. So we are not neutral. And the problem of stakeholders being positioned means that if we don't frame the outcome, the evidence of our work, others will do it for us. This means that if we as scientists fail to communicate our results, other stakeholders can use this evidence to construct narratives that benefit their goals. And because everything is polarized, not taking a stand means also taking a stand. Just one we don't have power on. And we know that many scientists don't feel comfortable about taking a stand. But we want to emphasize that taking a stand in communication doesn't mean to lose the integrity in your research. It just means that when you communicate, you set the outcomes in the context for the audience. So how we can develop effective narratives? I hope I have convinced you already that how we communicate and how we frame our message matters, and that being strategic or at least reflecting on how we do it is important. So since we are scientists, our narratives should be based in scientific evidence. That is obvious. And we should be accurate. I guess this is, again, obvious for all of you. But another important aspect is to construct plausible narratives. This means it should not be only accurate and based on evidence, but it should sound realistic for your audience. If not, they will not trust on it. They will not believe on it. And for that, it's really important that you know your audience. So active listening and critical thinking are mandatory aspects of how to construct a narrative. Also, we believe that it's really important to acknowledge trade-offs. There is a tendency to talk about win-win situations, but evidence shows that this is not the common or the more frequent. And also, you should take into consideration that when people is taking decisions, they don't only take decisions based on facts, but also aspects such as experience and emotions are important for taking decisions. So don't forget to include experience and emotions in your communication strategies. And with all that, I invite you to read our recent paper on the topic. There you will see more information about how to construct successful and effective narratives, and we provide some examples also. Well, I will move to the second part of this talk, that is about co-design. If you remember, I said that Showcase project have the goal of creating a European network of biodiversity experimental areas. These were multi-actor approaches for biodiversity innovation. We wanted to share for local solutions to local challenges, sharing a core approach through Europe, mostly sharing monitoring protocols along Europe. So, taking this, we created the Guadalquivir experimental biodiversity area with the objective of bringing to the same table intensive farmers to share knowledge and talk about biodiversity conservation. We started this process right after of the pandemic in 2021, so maybe it was not the easiest moment to start a social process, and we follow a top-down process. We started with a recruitment phase, and we contacted all farm cooperatives and companies of the stone fruit and citric sector in Seville region. And in autumn 2021, we were able to convince four of them, 2 companies and 2 cooperatives, to participate in the co-design process. I don't know if you are aware of what means co-designs, but co-design means that along the project, farmers and researchers collaborate and share power and responsibility also in the creation of knowledge. So in this first meeting, we also identified which farmers could participate in the process. We developed a diagnostic workshop using several social techniques, social methodologies, and we identified, for example, which was the perception about biodiversity and which problems had farmers in relation to that. And as a result, farmers wanted to, for this co-design process, they wanted to improve their knowledge about the biodiversity status in their farms, and also they wanted to test measures that could be aligned with the reform that was discussing at that moment. So with this information, we developed a dossier based on scientific evidence, following two lines, flower strip and edges. We present this dossier to the farmers and discuss with them several options, and we came we achieved an agreement on implementing floral green covers. 20 farms accepted this compromise, and we also decided the area of intervention and the management protocol. What happens is that it was impossible to achieve an agreement between all farmers about the same management in all farms, so we agreed on not agreeing. We decided to let farmers work business as usual in the intervention, but to not use herbicides in the green cover. And that was the only management measure there. So we have a real life experiment. The objectives for the farmers about this intervention was to benefit the farm stability in the long term, and they were really interested that that was made at the same time that yield was not affected. So we seeded in November, December 2021 a species mix to enhance floral abundance in the farms, within the farms. And as you can see, we seeded 19 farms. We already lost 1 farm. 2 farmers used herbicides on the intervention, so we lost these farms, and we finally monitored 16 farms. The experimental design, we seeded at least 4 rows, parallel rows, with the seed, the mixed seeds, separated by 20 meters, at least 20 meters. We have another 4 rows that we consider as control, but were just the normal management of the farmers. During the spring 2022, we monitor plants, pollinators and spiders. Also, we collected information about agronomic aspects such as yield, but also the management. In the autumn, with the first preliminary results, we developed a report for each farm and discussed these results with farmers and came up for a new agreement for the second year about the green cover. They wanted shorter plants because the vegetation had affected the management of the farms, and we wanted to enhance flower richness. So we agreed to a new cover, green cover, and this second year farmers were more enthusiastic and they seeded themselves instead of us. We monitor again, and in September, October this last year, we present a final report with the main results, and we are quite happy because most of our farmers, and most of the farms we were working, will continue implementing flower green covers once we left the project. So all this is a big collaborative effort. A team of 14 researchers have worked in the biodiversity monitoring, but also another 20 came from the agricultural side. Key challenge we faced during all this process? Well, our experiment is an experiment under real conditions. This means for example, some of them use herbicides, or it was not an experiment such as controlled as other experiments. Also, we faced the extreme drought that you all know are aware, and this affects not only biodiversity but also affect a lot the farmers. In 2023, most of our farmers lost around 70% of the yield that year. And also this created socio-ecological consequences. You all are aware about the inflation, the energy crisis, and transport strikes that affect a lot the farmers, and also this created some tensions with the project. Also, not always is easy to adapt these European protocols to the Mediterranean conditions or to orchards, and we learned that the social process is highly demanding, and it's not always easy to carry on and achieve the end. But we learned several things. I hope I have convinced you already about the importance of communication, so I jump this step. But for example, we learned that co-design requires knowledge and time. In our case, farmers showed little understanding of the biodiversity in their farms. They knew a lot about agronomic aspects, but they were not so aware about the biodiversity there. Also, our highly intensive farmers were really willing for results, but they were not so open to process it. It took a long time to convey the idea of a social process participation, that we were not the experts just proposing the experiment, but we wanted to do something together. And also that the tiny investment is not always possible or attractive to farmers, but also from our side as researchers. And second thing that we learned, and I think is useful, is managing expectations. So building trust relationship takes quite a long time, and in between active listening is really important, and misunderstandings will happen. The important thing is to keep open the conversation, also to really explain well what you can offer to the farmers. For example, we couldn't offer subsidies, so those that were expecting for us to pay them for implementing an experiment were out, or this kind of thing. And also, an important aspect I will say is conflict of interest. So, for example, we work with some multinational companies that have objectives really focus on production and economic benefits, and sometimes this is not aligned with conservation. We try our best to align these two things, but sometimes conflict of interest arises. And also, for example, me as an early career researcher, I want to do cool experiments, to publish in high impact journals, and sometimes this is not aligned with the needs and interests of farmers in the Vega del Guadalquivir. So these kind of things happened. And I'm moving to the last part. Shortly, I will introduce some results. So you may know that we require a considerable amount of native areas to maintain conservation maintain biodiversity in working landscape, and it has been proposed at 20% of native habitats. However, we are quite far away of this 20%. In the current Common Agricultural Policy, it has been set at 40% of non-productive areas, and this 4%, sorry, it was a big discussion point in the whole negotiation. So we are far away from what we want to achieve. And literature also says that more complex agricultural landscape is desirable and benefit biodiversity. However, most of the measures are applied at the farm level. Farmers are focused on aspects such as margins and revenues. And since we were working in orchards, we thought, okay, we have a cool study system, but there is not so much policy focus on permanent crops. So maybe these systems could help in this problem, because orchards have big amounts of surface that are non-productive, those that are between the tree lines. And we cannot consider these areas as natural, semi-natural areas because they are highly perturbed, but maybe these areas should not be completely lost. And that is what we wanted to test. So we wanted to know how these non-productive areas could help to biodiversity conservation under real conditions. This is in highly intensive farms, as our farms were. And also we wanted to test if there were benefits, if would happen in all taxa in the same way, if that was compatible with with yield production or not. So as a first result, we were quite happy seeing that our highly intensive farm systems holds interesting numbers of biodiversity. So we found both years around 100 different plant species. We also found interesting numbers of spiders. The second year, the draw make a big impact on the spiders community, and also we found a interesting number for wild pollinators. And we measured that the intervention did benefit not only richness but also abundance of several gills. Especially, we we found significant results for pollinators and predator insects and parasitoids. But there were some trade-offs. So flowers enhance pollinators, but for example, spiders were not so benefit by the green cover as pollinators, for example. Farmers were also interested in, because seeding with the species mix is expensive because you have to buy the seeds. So they were also interested what happens with other circumstances. And I'm sorry because I think I skipped this part, but our control were not always bare soil. We have different control types. So some of them hold spontaneous vegetation, some of them hold graminoids, and others bare soil. And since farmers were interested in this, we also measure we compare how respond these other cover types, and we consider that spontaneous vegetation could be a secondary good option because it's cheaper and also provide some benefits for several gills. And all this was done without affecting the yield of the farms. That was really, really important for our farmers. And also, because we were working in highly intensive farms, we were interested in checking how the intensity of the management affect the intervention. So literature acknowledges that intensification is counterproductive for biodiversity. Literature reflects that agroenvironmental schemes have a limited impact, that this depends on several factors like the intervention itself, the surrounding landscape, and also the ecological contrast between the intervention and the rest of the landscape. But the role of management intensity is poorly understood because, in general terms, agronomic indicators are often ignored in ecology and the other way around. So, seeing that we included highly intensive farmers, but there were a big range because we have small farmers and also companies, we check if management intensity increase or decrease the effectiveness of our intervention. And what we found is that we found a significant interaction between intervention and intensity of management. So those farms that were more intense hold higher numbers of pollinators in their interventions. But we were able to find this interaction in the case of spiders. For example, we observe a slightly negative effect of the interaction and of the intensity. Sorry. And in the case of predator and parasitoids, we observe a clear effect of the green cover, but not any effect of the intensity. So what we have seen is, considering that these are intensive management farmlands, there are some opportunities for biodiversity there without affecting the yield. That is, in this context, what imports the most to the farmers, and that the management intensity vary among taxa, and this is a big project. There are many results. You can take a look to other results through this link. I want to thank the amazing team of the Bartomeu's Lab and the EBD. And of course, mention also all farmers and agricultural technicians and cooperatives and companies that collaborate in the project and make all this possible. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elena. We have time for questions. And before I open the floor, I also remind to those watching us on YouTube that you could use the chat if you want to ask your questions there. I can break the ice. Oh, no.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Like I have like a tiny thing, like in the context of narratives, it works like finding common points, so you can like play the game of pulling and letting them pull, so you can find common ground. But how do you deal with irrational people? Like there is a side of irrational narratives that they are like, let's say, they always have the point because their own world, their own bubble works around something that has no sense, but for them is the base ground. How do you make your narrative work against that? How do you make your narrative work against farmers or like societies or like people that think like, for example, the Agenda 2030 that wants to rule the world and things like that?
Okay, good question. So first of all, I want to say that we don't have recipes for how, like, because we don't want to create narrative, no, or like recipes for others. I think every person should develop their own narratives. In this case, I think the first decision is to see if you want to confront them or if you want to try to build trust, and after that keep a conversation open to try to convince them. And I think this decision will depend on your final objectives. I do believe that the certain narratives should be confronted and counter narratives should be done, but I also have learned through this project that talking with others that have really different point of view. Some of our farmers, the first time I called them and I told them I am an ecologist, they me off because they were not interested in ecology at all, and I was forced to try it again and try it again, and I have learned that sometimes starting by not so conflicting positions and trying to find common topics and start to talk from these common topics to others is a good alternative. In the case of this, I don't know how to pronounce the denialism or wherever, of course, there is always a point where the limit of the scientific evidence or no is apart. But I think that from our side, as scientists, we are also biased. We tend to think that facts convince others, and that is not true. Emotions and perceptions and experience shape a lot the way of thinking and also our as scientists. So we are also biased as scientists, and sometimes they're starting with the with the plausible aspects, so things that seem logical to them, and then introduce the scientific evidence could help, I will say.
Oh, thank you.
Another question? I'll ask mine. In the second part of your presentation with the Guadalquivir project, I was curious how you chose the set of core indicators that you used to assess impact, and if the farmers, for instance, were also involved in that choice.
That was so half-half. The plant spiders and pollinators were part of the European protocol, but also we asked our farmers what they were interested, and that's why we also set the sticky traps to try to measure the whole arthropod community within the farms. But they never have a specific question on that, because they were more interested in knowing what is there, that in enhancing ones and other, they didn't have the knowledge to establish this kind of question. And I think thanks to the project, they have realized that there is an amazing variety of beings in their farms, that how they manage the farm affect these communities, and also I think we have helped them to learn a little bit about benefits and so on.
So a bit of a follow-up on that, because you lost 4 farms, but after the second year, was there more farms that would be interested in joining? Or?
We lost some farms in the very beginning. Some of them because of because of the draw, decided that the interaction was too risky. Most of the farms were the same in the 2 years, but I think some of the farms changed from the second year just because the farmer preferred a different one, or one that the previous year used herbicides, the second year didn't, and so on. So mostly the monitor has happened in the same farms. And before entering here, I was talking with one of the farmers, and he was telling me, I will send you pictures of the cover this year because it has rained, and this year is really good. So
nice.
They are Yeah.
Hi, sorry, maybe I skipped this part, but I was wondering if the crops you made the experiments, they were different crops on different...
No, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't explain this correctly because I have summarized a lot of information. So we were just focusing on stone fruit orchards, so peaches, plums, and nectarines.
And you think that maybe in different crops you would find different results?
Of course.
Yeah.
So we focus on orchards, and I think part of the result could be applied to different permanent crops. There is like other big European projects such as Olivares Vivos that have shown, for example, really interesting and good results for olive crops. Yeah. But yes, this will completely change if we consider, I don't know, like cereals.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking maybe in agroecological systems where you already have more diversity on the crops, maybe if the, but yeah, of course. Thank you.
More questions? Yes.
You partially addressed this when you commented that one of your farmers was just telling you about this year's growth. But are these? Do you think that these farmers are going to make lasting changes in their management practice? Is there any contagion? Are they telling their other farmer friends?
I think there is a change is happening. Partly because what they learn thanks to the project, especially, so we have some farmers that were in denial about, like they didn't want any wheat in their farms, and I think those have acknowledged that wheat doesn't hurt so much. And also we have some farmers that were having only graminoids, green covers, and the gramineous hasn't have good results, but I'm not so sure if those will completely change. But in general terms, most of the farmers are changing, not only ours but also others. Also because when we were deciding in the intervention, the new reform of the CAT was under discussion, so it was not settled. But now green covers are one of the interventions that can be applied. The thing is that green cover, like they call green covers also the leftovers of the pruning, so they are not so green at all. And I think our farmers have realized that it's better spontaneous vegetation than just the leftovers of the pruning, and so on. So yes, and also because we also did some. For example, some farmers were interested in edges, and we provide plants for that, and so on. So we enter in contact and also the agricultural technicians that provide recommendations to the farmers. So I think our impact goes beyond our experiment. In the first year, many of the farmers were duped into to participate or not, and the second year with some of them we have to discuss, okay, we need 4 rows of control, because once they see that there were no disadvantages and some benefits, they were willing to participate. So yes.
There's still time for questions. Same comment for those on YouTube. Yes.
Thank you, Elena, for the talk. It was really nice to see the whole project in the end wrapping up. My question is more related to the feasibility of this type of actions, in the sense of, in this case, what you were doing, the green cover, wasn't affecting the crops, but maybe at some point we have to reduce the crops, or we will have to change how we do agriculture. And I'm not sure, like, even if these small steps are getting into the farmers and they're starting to look forward these, like, introducing these type of techniques, you also said they didn't see any disadvantages to this green cover, so that's why they did it. And I'm not sure whether society is ready to, like, do you think we will be able to change how agriculture works through these type of movements when we have to do the step towards reducing the production, for instance, or things like this?
Yeah, I see your point, and I agree with your point. And also, while I think I have tried to put these aspects also when constructing narratives and so on, like we sometimes work with, or when we do the participatory process, we sometimes work with farmers that have really opposing perspectives that the ones that we want, or that science have proved as needed. So yes, sometimes could be difficult, but I will say that these are steps that work. Maybe it doesn't change fully, but I will say that for a fully change, this is a multifactorial problem, so we need to change several factors, and probably one of them is how agri-food markets work. And also that's why also Showcase include other stakeholders, not only farmers, but also agricultural associations, NGOs, people from policy making, and so on, because we require people along the whole chain working to change the situation. So change is difficult, but not impossible, and parallel efforts should be done, I would say.
Thank you.
Okay, this is your last chance to ask a question. All right. So thanks again, Elena, for coming back and for sharing all those results with us. And yeah, I guess we can close the session. Thank you.